The rain hit the windshield like gravel. Elias Thorne kept his eyes on the center line, hands locked at 10 and 2, breathing through his nose the way he'd trained himself to do when the surgical kit rattled in the toolbox behind his seat. The dead zone highway didn't have streetlights. It didn't have guardrails. It had 30 miles of cracked asphalt between the Capitol's checkpoint towers and the northern rim, where the law stopped pretending to care. He'd driven this stretch twice a week for 3 years. Scrap metal didn't collect itself. Maya needed new shoes. The salvage yard needed diesel, and Elias needed to stay invisible. Never look at the drivers. That was the rule. When the black SUVs rolled past with tinted windows and no plates, you kept your head down. When the sedans with government tags idled on the shoulder with their engines running, you didn't slow down. And when the interceptors, sleek, carbon-bodied missiles built for speed and silence, screamed past doing 120, you pretended you hadn't seen them at all. Because in the dead zone, the cars that crashed weren't accidents. They were conclusions. The thunder split the sky 3 seconds before the interceptor came into view. It wasn't on the road. It was cartwheeling through the air, glass and metal spiraling outward in a bright, wet explosion. Elias felt the shock wave rattle his teeth. The truck's headlights caught the vehicle mid-flip, once, twice, 3 times, before it slammed into the salt marsh 50 yards off the shoulder and disappeared into the black water. His foot hit the brake before his brain caught up. The truck slid, tires screamed. He stopped 20 feet from the edge of the asphalt, rain hammering the roof, his breath coming too fast. His hands were still on the wheel, his eyes were still forward, but he'd already broken the first rule. He'd looked. The marsh was shallow this time of year, maybe 3 feet of brackish water over mud thick enough to swallow a man whole. Smoke rose from the wreckage, pale and chemical, twisting in the rain. No fire, not yet. But Elias knew what kind of fuel those interceptors ran on. He had maybe 90 seconds before the whole thing went up. He should leave. He should put the truck in gear, drive the remaining 22 miles to the yard, and forget he'd seen anything. That was survival. That was smart. That was what kept Maya fed and kept his name off the lists. But then he saw the shadows. 3 of them, moving through the rain like they'd been waiting. They wore no insignia, no lights, no reflective tape, just black tack gear and the kind of smooth mechanical efficiency that came from doing this before. One of them waded into the marsh. Another stood on the bank with a rifle, scanning the tree line. The third pulled someone from the driver's side window. A woman, limp, dragged by the collar. Elias's hands tightened on the wheel. He couldn't see her face, but he could see the way her head lolled, the way her boots scraped uselessly through the mud. He could see the tactical carbon fiber plating on her vest, the kind only Syndicate operatives wore. She was a state enemy, a professional, and they were going to finish her.
The explosion came early. Secondary fuel cell, Elias thought, even as the shock wave knocked the closest shadow off his feet. The woman fell face first into the water. The others scattered, shouting into radios, hands over their ears. Flame roared up from the interceptor's chassis, turning the rain to steam. Elias didn't think. He opened the door, stepped into the storm, and ran. The mud sucked at his boots. The rain blurred everything. He reached the woman in 10 seconds, grabbed her under the arms and hauled her backward. She was heavier than she looked, dense muscle, reinforced plating, the dead weight of someone whose body had already given up. Her throat was sliced open, a clean horizontal cut that had missed the artery by millimeters. Her abdomen was shredded, shrapnel wounds radiating outward from her left side. This wasn't a crash. This was a hit. He dragged her to the truck, threw open the rear gate, and shoved her inside. Blood smeared the bedliner. Her head cracked against the toolbox. She didn't make a sound. Elias climbed in beside her, yanked the surgical kit from its cradle, and tore it open. Hemostatic gauze, combat seal, adrenaline spike. His hands moved without hesitation, muscle memory older than the life he'd built here. He packed the throat wound first, fingers slick with blood and marsh water, and pressed the seal down hard. Her pulse was thready, erratic, failing. Her hand shot up and locked around his wrist. The strength in her grip was impossible. She was dying. Her organs were failing. Her blood pressure was crashing, but her fingers dug into his skin like a vice. She pulled him close, her breath reeking of copper and ozone, her eyes black and glassy in the dim light. She didn't ask for help. She didn't beg. She whispered, "The nursery is empty, Ghost. They know where the daughter is." Elias froze. Ghost. That was the name they'd used when he still had clearance, when he still wore the insignia, when he was still the man who could erase battlefield casualties before the blood dried. He hadn't heard it in 5 years. He'd buried it with his career, his rank, his life. But she knew. And if she knew, then they all knew. He ripped his wrist free, slammed the truck gate shut, and climbed into the driver's seat. His hands were shaking. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He could still see the shadows regrouping near the wreckage, flashlights cutting through the rain. He had 30 seconds, maybe less. He turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, roared. The dead zone highway stretched ahead, wet and black and endless. Behind him, the woman coughed once, a wet, bubbling sound, and went silent. Elias drove. Maya was going to ask why he was late. She was going to ask why there was blood on his jacket, and he was going to have to lie to her, the way he'd lied every day since they'd fled the capital. But this time, the lie wasn't going to be enough. Because the woman in the back of his truck wasn't a stranger. She was the sentinel who'd been watching him all along, and by saving her, Elias had just told the entire syndicate exactly where to find him. If you think you know how this ends, you're wrong. Stay until the truth comes out.
The yard looked the same as it always did. Rust-eaten car frames stacked 6 high. A corrugated metal shed with a roof that leaked in 4 places. A diesel generator that coughed black smoke every time it started. Home. Or the closest thing Elias had managed to build. He backed the truck into the shed, killed the engine, and sat in the dark, listening. Rain drummed on the roof. The wind rattled the loose panels. Nothing else. No rotors. No voices. Not yet. But they were coming. He knew they were coming. He climbed out, opened the gate, and stared at the woman. She was still breathing, shallow, ragged breaths that barely moved her chest. The hemostatic seal on her throat had held, but the abdominal wounds were worse than he'd thought. Shrapnel had punctured her lower intestine, maybe her liver. She needed a hospital. She needed a trauma team. She needed things Elias couldn't give her. But he was all she had. He dragged her inside, laid her on the workbench, and stripped off her vest. Underneath, her skin was pale, clammy, mottled with bruises. He cut away her shirt, exposing the full extent of the damage. 3 entry wounds, ragged and deep, radiating from her left side. No exit wounds. The shrapnel was still inside. He was going to have to dig it out. Elias set up a battery-powered work light, clamped it to the edge of the bench, and scrubbed his hands with industrial disinfectant. It burned. It always burned. But it was better than sepsis. He laid out his tools, scalpel, forceps, welding clamps he'd sterilized in a propane flame, suture thread he'd salvaged from a veterinary clinic 3 towns over. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't even close, but it was what he had. The woman's eyes snapped open. Elias jerked back, scalpel raised. She stared at him, her gaze sharp and clear despite the blood loss, despite the failing organs, despite everything. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched him,
her expression unreadable. "I'm going to take the shrapnel out," Elias said. His voice sounded too loud in the small space. "If I don't, you'll die of internal bleeding in the next 2 hours. If I do, you'll die of infection in the next 2 days. Your choice." She blinked once, slowly. Elias took that as consent. He made the first incision. Blood welled up, dark and thick. He packed the wound with gauze, applied pressure, and counted to 10. The bleeding slowed. He inserted the forceps, feeling for the first piece of shrapnel. Metal scraped against metal. He pulled it free, a jagged shard the size of his thumb, slick with blood and tissue. The woman didn't make a sound. He found the second piece lodged near her lower rib. Extraction took 3 minutes. The third was deeper, embedded in muscle. He had to use the welding clamps to pry it loose. The smell of blood and disinfectant filled the shed, sharp and nauseating. Halfway through the sutures, he felt it. A hard lump beneath her left shoulder, just under the skin, rectangular, matte black, with a single LED embedded in the surface. The LED was glowing, green, active.
Elias felt his stomach drop. This wasn't data storage. This was a tracking beacon, and it had been transmitting since the moment he'd pulled her from the marsh. He stepped back, scalpel still in hand, his mind racing. The Syndicate didn't use passive beacons. They used geofenced protocols, systems that pinged a central server every 60 seconds, confirming the operative's location and status. If the signal stopped, a cleanup team was dispatched. If the signal moved, the team followed. And Elias had just brought that signal straight to his home. He looked at the woman. She was watching him, her eyes half-lidded but awake. She knew. She'd known the whole time. "You could have told me," Elias said. She coughed, a wet, rattling sound. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Would it have changed anything?" Elias didn't answer, because the truth was, it wouldn't have. He'd already committed treason the moment he stopped the truck. He finished the sutures, bandaged the incisions, and covered her with a tarp. Then he walked to the door of the shed, pushed it open, and stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The sky was low and gray, the kind of gray that made the horizon feel too close. In the distance, faint but growing louder, Elias heard it. The hum of high-altitude drones. He stood in the yard, his boots sinking into the mud, and listened. The sound was mechanical, rhythmic, relentless. It vibrated through the air, through the ground, through his chest. It wasn't just surveillance, it was a countdown. They weren't coming to kill him, not yet. They were watching, waiting, confirming. Elias turned and walked back into the shed. The woman was sitting up now, her back against the wall, one hand pressed to her bandaged abdomen. She looked at him, her expression cold and calculating, even in her weakened state. "How long?" Elias asked. "Until they breach?" She tilted her head, considering. 2 hours, maybe 3, depends on how patient they're feeling. "And if I remove the implant?" "They'll assume I'm dead. The protocol will escalate to immediate termination. You'll have 30 minutes. Elias exhaled slowly. 30 minutes. 2 hours. It didn't matter. He was already out of time. He looked at the woman, at the scars on her hands, at the way she held herself even now, coiled, ready, dangerous. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't someone he'd saved. She was a weapon, and she knew exactly how to break him. "You should have let me die," she said quietly. "Now they won't just kill us. They'll use her to make us watch." Elias's blood went cold. She knew about Maya. Of course she knew. She'd been watching him for years, monitoring his movements, logging his routines, waiting for him to make a mistake. And now he had. The drone hum grew louder. Elias stood in the doorway, staring out at the gray sky, at the yard he'd built with his own hands, at the life he'd fought so hard to protect. The eraser was back,
But he was out of medicine, out of time, and trapped with a woman who knew exactly where to cut.
Maya was supposed to be asleep. She wasn't. Elias found her at the edge of the yard, crouched behind a stack of rusted car hoods, holding a pair of cracked binoculars to her face. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with tangled blonde hair and a jacket 2 sizes too big. She didn't look up when he approached. She just kept staring at the southern horizon, her breath fogging the lenses. "Go inside," Elias said. "There are 4 of them now," Maya said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "They've been circling for the last 20 minutes. Too high, too low. The low ones are using thermal." Elias felt his chest tighten. "How do you know that?" She lowered the binoculars and looked at him. Her eyes were wide, clear, and far too old for her face. "Because they keep coming back to the same spots. The shed, the generator, the truck. They're mapping heat signatures." Elias stared at her. "Where did you learn that?" Maya shrugged. "You left your books out." She had. Of course she had. The tactical manuals he'd hidden under the floorboards, the field surgery guides he'd thought she'd never find. He'd underestimated her. He always underestimated her. "I need you to go inside," Elias said again. "Now." "Why is there a woman in the shed?" The question landed like a punch. Elias didn't answer. He didn't know how. Maya tilted her head, studying him. "She's hurt. I saw the blood on the bench, and I heard her coughing." "Maya, is she one of them?" Elias froze. "One of who?" Maya reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases, and held it up. It was a map, hand-drawn, precise, detailed. The dead zone highway, the salvage yard, the checkpoint towers, and scattered across the page small black marks with dates written beside them in careful, childish handwriting. She'd been documenting the black SUVs, every single one, for weeks. Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. "What is this?" "Surveillance patterns," Maya said. She pointed to the marks clustered near the yard. "They started 6 weeks ago. 1 car every 3 days, then 2, then 4. Last week they stopped using the highway. They started coming through the marsh instead." Elias's hands went numb. "Why didn't you tell me? I thought you already knew." The words hit him like a blade. Of course she thought he knew. She'd been watching him her whole life, watching him check the locks, watching him scan the tree line, watching him flinch every time headlights passed the yard. She thought he was prepared, but he wasn't. He'd been hiding, and hiding had made them both targets. Elias knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "Maya, listen to me. I need you to pack a bag, food, water, the emergency kit under your bed. We're leaving in 30 minutes. Maya didn't move. "Where are we going?" "I don't know yet." "Are they going to kill us?" The question was so direct, so unflinching, that Elias felt something crack inside him. He wanted to lie. He wanted to tell her they'd be fine, that he'd protect her, that nothing bad was going to happen. But Maya deserved the truth. "They're going to try," Elias said. Maya nodded slowly. Then she folded the map, tucked it back into her jacket, and walked toward the house. Elias stood alone in the yard, the drone hum vibrating through his skull, and realized the worst part. Maya wasn't afraid. She was ready. Because she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life, and he'd been too blind to see it. Inside the shed, the woman was on her feet. She shouldn't have been. She'd lost at least 2 pints of blood. Her organs were barely holding together. But she was standing, one hand braced against the workbench, the other wrapped around a ceramic blade she'd pulled from somewhere Elias hadn't thought to check.
"You can't run," she said. Elias stopped in the doorway. "Watch me. They've already locked the perimeter. Thermal satellites, ground teams, air support. You won't make it a mile. Then I'll make it half a mile." The woman laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You still think this is about you." Elias felt his jaw tighten. "What's that supposed to mean?" She pushed off the bench, took 2 unsteady steps forward, and stopped. Her face was pale, her pupils dilated, but her voice was steady. "The implant doesn't just track location, it records everything. Audio, biometrics, tactical decisions. 5 years of data, Elias. Every order I ignored, every target I let walk, every time I chose not to pull the trigger." Elias stared at her. "You're saying you're a liability. I'm saying I'm proof." She tapped the side of her head. "Proof that the Syndicate's internal discipline protocols are failing. Proof that operatives are making independent moral judgments. Proof that dissent exists." "And they want it back?" "They want it erased." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "But you're in it now. The moment you pulled me out, you became part of the record. A deserter who saved a defector. That makes you valuable." Elias felt the weight of the words settle over him. Valuable how? Alive. The silence that followed was absolute. No rain, no wind, just the faint hum of the drones overhead and the sound of Elias's own breathing. "They're not coming to kill you," the woman said. "They're coming to make you compliant, and they'll use her to do it." Elias didn't ask who she meant. He already knew. He turned and walked back outside. The thermal searchlight swept across the yard, slow and deliberate, painting everything in pale, ghostly white. It locked onto the shed, held, then moved on. They were close now, close enough to see, close enough to wait. Elias looked at the house, at the small, crooked window where Maya's light still burned, and he made a choice. You think you understand what's at stake. You don't. Keep watching.
The first breach didn't come from the ground. It came from the sky. Elias heard the rotors before he saw them. Low, rhythmic, too quiet to be civilian. He stepped out of the shed, looked up, and saw the black shape descending through the clouds. No lights, no insignia, just a matte black fuselage and the kind of precision that came from military-grade GPS. It landed in the yard, rotors still spinning, and 3 figures stepped out. They weren't soldiers. Soldiers wore patches, carried radios, followed protocols. These were cleaners, silent, efficient, disposable. The lead figure, a woman in a tactical vest with no rank markings, raised a hand. The rotors slowed. The hum died. Silence. Elias stood 10 feet from the shed door, hands empty, heart pounding. Behind him, he could feel the woman watching from the shadows. Ahead of him, Maya's window went dark. The lead figure walked forward, stopped 5 feet away, and spoke. Elias Thorne, former Tier 1 surgical specialist, deserter, currently harboring a compromised syndicate operative and evading a standing termination order. Her voice was flat, administrative. You have 2 options: surrender the asset and accept relocation, or refuse and accept immediate termination. Elias didn't move. What about my daughter? She'll be placed in protective custody pending your cooperation. That's not an option. The woman tilted her head. Then you've chosen termination. No. The voice came from behind Elias. The woman, Vesper, stepped out of the shed, one hand pressed to her bandaged abdomen, the other holding the ceramic blade.
The implant is still active. If you kill me, the data goes to secondary servers. If you extract me by force, the protocol escalates to full disclosure. But if Elias here agrees to cooperate, I hand it over willingly." Elias stared at her. "What are you doing?" Vesper didn't look at him. "Giving you a way out." The lead figure's hand moved to her sidearm. "The asset is Syndicate property. You have no authority to negotiate its terms. The asset is documented proof of internal dissent, and Elias is proof that someone inside your chain of command chose mercy over orders. If you kill him, you lose the leverage. If you kill me, you lose the data. But if you let us both walk, you get everything." The silence stretched. The thermal searchlight swept the yard again, slower this time, deliberate. The lead figure's radio crackled. Not static, data, fast, urgent. Her eyes flicked to the yard's perimeter, then to the shed behind Elias. A faint chirp echoed from the generator housing, sharp and wrong. Elias felt it in his gut before the sound finished. The generator coughed once, then died. The yard lights snapped off. The shed dropped into darkness. The hum of the drones shifted pitch, recalibrating. "Thermal reassignment in progress," the radio voice said flatly. "Secondary heat sources acquired." Maya's house went cold. Elias turned toward it without meaning to. The lead figure watched him, expression unchanged. "You have 6 hours," she said. "After that, the decision moves above my authority." The rotors spun up. The helicopter lifted, banking away into the low cloud cover, leaving the yard darker, quieter, and significantly smaller. Elias stood in the yard, rain beginning to fall again, and looked at Vesper. "You just bought us 6 hours. What happens after that?" Vesper pressed her hand harder against her abdomen. Blood was seeping through the bandages. "After that, it doesn't matter, because the implant's countdown just reset." Elias felt his stomach drop. "What countdown?" "The one I triggered when I activated the negotiation protocol. The moment I offered them the data, the system started a verification sequence. If I don't deliver the decryption key in 6 hours, the implant self-destructs. And when it does, it takes everything with it: the data, the evidence, and anyone within 10-meter radius." Elias stared at her. "You turned yourself into a bomb." "I turned myself into a deadline." The rain fell harder. The yard was empty now, but Elias could still feel the weight of the surveillance. Satellites, drones, ground teams, all of them watching, waiting for the clock to run out. He looked at the house. Maya's window was still dark. And Elias realized the truth. The only way to save her was to make sure the countdown never finished, which meant he had to deliver the decryption key himself.
"The key isn't in the implant," Vesper said. "That's just the lock." Elias didn't like the way she said it. "It's biometric, retinal pattern, voice print, a 12-digit cognitive sequence." "And you memorized it," Elias said. Vesper's lips twitched, not a smile, something smaller. "No, I carried it." Elias leaned closer. "Define carried." Her eyes met his. Partitioned memory, layered responses, pieces triggered by command authority I no longer have. Elias felt his stomach sink. "And the rest?" he asked. Vesper exhaled slowly. "The rest was designed to be recovered after I stop breathing." Elias stared at her. "You're telling me the only way to get the key is to kill you." "I'm telling you the system was designed to eliminate loose ends." "The moral cost of survival isn't always survival. It's what you become to keep it." Elias stepped back, his mind racing.
If Vesper died, the implant would be recoverable. The Syndicate would get their data, but Maya would still be a target. If Vesper lived, the implant would self-destruct. The Syndicate would lose their proof, but the explosion would kill everyone in the shed. There was no clean outcome. There was only the choice of who died first. Elias looked at Maya, who had appeared in the doorway, silent and watchful. She was holding the emergency kit, her face pale but steady. "Tell me what to do," Maya said. Elias felt something crack inside him. "Go to the house, lock the doors, don't come out until I tell you." "No, Maya." "You're going to let her die," Maya said. Not a question, a statement. Elias didn't answer, because the truth was, he didn't know. Vesper's hand shot out, grabbed Elias's wrist and pulled him close. Her grip was weak now, trembling. "There's a third option." Elias leaned in. "What?" "Breach the implant manually. Force the countdown to expire early. The explosion will be smaller, containable, but it has to be done from the inside." Elias felt his blood go cold. "You're asking me to trigger it. I'm asking you to choose." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from outside, the sound of rotors, closer this time, louder. The 6 hours were up. Elias looked at Vesper, at Maya, at the shed that had been his home, and now was his grave. And he made his choice. Elias placed his hand on the implant. The hum beneath his palm wasn't steady anymore. It skipped, micro-pauses between pulses, like a heart starting to fail. "You miscalculate this, and the blast won't stay contained." Elias didn't look at her. He adjusted the breach sequence by feel alone, overriding a safeguard he recognized from an older system, one he'd written the surgical countermeasures for himself. The LED blinked red, then stayed red. 30 seconds, the implant said, calm, certain. Elias reached for the medical kit out of instinct and stopped. If it survived, they'd trace it. He kicked the bench hard. The kit fell, split open, scattering instruments across the floor. He crushed the last transmitter under his heel. Then he grabbed Maya and ran. The explosion tore through the yard, a sharp, violent crack that turned the night white. The shed collapsed, the workbench shattered, the flames roared up, bright and final. Elias and Maya hit the ground 20 feet away, ears ringing, lungs burning. When the smoke cleared, the yard was gone, the shed was gone, and Vesper's body was gone. But the surveillance drones were still overhead, the thermal satellites were still tracking, and the Syndicate was still watching. Elias looked at Maya, her face streaked with soot, her eyes wide but dry. "We're not safe," Elias said. "I know," Maya said. And together, they walked into the dark. The countdown was over. Elias pulled Maya close, scanning the smoke-filled dark, when Maya stiffened in his arms. "Dad," she said softly. "What?" She was staring past him, not at the drones, not at the sky. "At the yard," she whispered. "Something's still responding." Elias turned. In the ruins of the shed, buried under twisted metal and ash, a single green light blinked once, then went dark.